by asking you what drew you to this presentation, besides the coupon?
The title.
The name
The
is now
title. Okay, the title. Well, the title I'll get to sort of halfway through the presentation. I do want to assure you that this is not a cooking show. This is not a topic about cooking. Okay. So we can leave Julia Child behind now. And we can go to, how did I come up with this topic? I came up with this topic because I was teaching a course a little while back on gender construction. You can see I like kind of fancy titles. The title of the course was Sex, Sin, and Kin. And it's about how gender construction, how do we come to understand who we are as gendered human beings? And we started out in that course by taking creation stories and deconstructing them with the words that accrued to males and accrued to females. And that was kind of interesting. This is the Lord God Marduk, who creates the universe, who creates the world by slaughtering his grandmother and cutting her in half, and he raises one half of her on high to become the heavens, and the other half is the earth, and then he pokes out her two eyes, and that's where we get the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So the story had a lot to do with the kind of the triumph of military technology over nature, and we went from there, always mindful that we are reading a myth with the eyes of a 21st century person, but trying to get at what did this mean for the people who told this story about themselves? Because that's what creation stories are about. They're stories that people tell about themselves to each other. How did we get here? Who turned on the lights, and how can we get on his good side? Is basically the problematic. The other one there is Lilith. Lilith is also from a Mesopotamian creation story or hymn. And what do you notice about her that's a little bit...
Feet.
Her feet. Yeah, she's got talons for feet. And she has wings. And she's very, very angry. And what she does, because her children have been killed, she flies into homes in the night, steals semen, impregnates herself, and gives birth to monsters. So there's a whole other side to the destructiveness of, here's the destructiveness of the male principle and the female principle. Well, while I was teaching this course, I started to think about, well, can we go beyond creation stories to try to decode what subtle messages about gender do people receive when they're told bedtime stories? So people have been telling bedtime stories ever since there were beds and kids to tell them to, I think. So thus I started thinking about folk tales. How can we make them into fodder for an understanding of a mentality of a people? And here's the problem with folk tales. Maybe you can guess what the problem is just by looking at the pictures. What time period do these pictures come from?
Brothers Grimm, is that?
The Mother Goose.
Mother
Goose comes from a French collector whose stories then filtered into Grimm. But this is what, a 19th century picture of a goose who looks really benevolent,
yes,
taking care of the children. And so we have to be mindful, if we're looking at fairy tales and folk tales, we have to be mindful of when is the tale being told, when was it originally told, and if there are differences, why are there differences in terms of the telling of the tale? Folk tales, fairy tales change over time because they're kind of living documents about what we think is important. So, to go on, these are, and so folk tales are mutable, they're changeable. And if you just take one, take Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, Anybody ever read the original story? This is an Ariel, and she doesn't marry the prince, she dies. Okay? But we've got here, this is Ariel, she's friendly, she's got animals as friends, she's friends with the folks in the sea, and she successfully transitions to land and gets the prince. So it's a happy ending. Whereas Hans Christian Andersen's story is pretty sad.
Was it a silky, or was it a mermaid?
It was a mermaid, yeah. Okay, so here's another piece that we have to be kind of careful of if we're looking at folk tales. And I call this the Disneyfication of our stories. And what's the commodity that Disney sells and makes a lot of money on? Princesses,
Yeah.
right? So these are basically variations on the same woman, even down to the hairdo and so forth. And it's always a happy ending, and there are a couple of little animals that are cute that run around. And of course, there are villains. And we did, in the Sex, Sin, and Kin class, we did look at the Disney version of the film just to look at body types and what's being said about male and females as far as cartoons go. But let me just briefly talk about what the originally recorded stories are like. In Cinderella, Cinderella gets the prince, the shoe fits, and so forth. In the earliest recorded stories about Cinderella, she becomes a maid in her father's house so that she doesn't have to marry him. So here's incest going on. And her stepmother, who intended to push her into the oven, inadvertently throws one of the ugly stepsisters into the oven and burns her to death. So we have someone killing their child, someone intending to kill the child, and we have incest going on. Okay. I can't remember what this one is here. Sleeping Beauty. No, maybe it's Sleeping. Well, I can tell you the original Sleeping Beauty.
Thanks, guys.
The original Sleeping Beauty, she falls asleep. The prince comes to her rescue. He happens to be married. She gives birth to about 7 children while she's in a coma. And she awakes not because he takes the apple out of her mouth with a kiss, but because the babies are nursing and they have teeth and they bite her. And she wakes up. Okay, so Disney. He's just cleaned everything up for us, and we buy it. We pay for happy endings. Okay, Beauty and the Beast, which comes out of France from the 15th century. In Beauty and the Beast, there are a series of 6 or 7 wives that the Beast marries, and he devours them in the wedding bed. So that's his wedding dinner. It's his wife. Okay. So that's sort of a warning as to what do we do with this stuff if we want to be historians and we want to make use of folk tales. I'm going to read to you a tale from 16th century France. I'll do it really quickly, and I want you to tell me to what extent does it coincide or jibe with the story that you know. And here it goes. Once a little girl was told by her mother to bring some bread and milk to the grandmother. And as the girl was walking through the forest, a wolf came up to her and asked where she was going. To grandmother's house, she replied. Which path are you taking? The path of pins or the path of needles? The path of needles. So the wolf took the path of pins and arrived first at the house. He killed the grandmother. He poured her blood into a little bottle, and he sliced her flesh onto a platter. Then he got into her night clothes and waited in bed. Knock, knock. Come in, my dear. Hello, grandmother. I've brought you some bread and milk. Have something yourself, my dear. There's meat and wine in the pantry. So the little girl ate what was offered, and as she did, a little cat said, slut. to eat the flesh and drink the blood of your own grandmother. Okay, this gets even more involved. Okay, so the little girl ate what she's offered, and then the wolf said, undress and get into bed with me. Where shall I put my apron? Throw it in the fire, you won't need it anymore. And each garment, the bodice, the skirt, the petticoat, the stockings, the girl asks the same question, and the wolf has the same answer. Throw it on the fire, you won't need it anymore. When the girl got into bed, she said, oh, grandmother, how hairy you are. It's to keep me warm, dear. Oh, grandmother, what big shoulders you have. It's for carrying firewood, my dear. Oh, grandmother, what long nails you have. It's for scratching myself better, my dear. Oh, grandmother, what big teeth you have. It's for eating you better, my dear. And he ate her. End of story. Okay.
All right.
So,
That's not that.
how does that...
That's what my mother ate me.
Well, we'll get to that. So how does that differ from the story that you know?
Doesn't end so good. Yeah.
There is no happy ending, for one thing. Yeah.
Remember any cannibalism in them?
There's no cannibalism in the story that you know. That we don't even have to go to Disney. We can go back further, and it gets cleaned up by the time it comes into most sensibilities of Western culture, anyway. Anything else? I didn't mention.
There's no hero.
There's no hero. Absolutely. There's no woodsman to the rescue who cuts open the belly of the wolf and out pops grandmother and Red Riding Hood. And there's no Red Riding Hood. She's not wearing a red cloak in the original story. So how do we get the story that we do? Well, partly, I'll go back to Eric Fromm in a minute. We get it from the Brothers Grimm, and the Brothers Grimm took their story from a servant who was the descendant of Protestants who fled France, Huguenots, when Louis XIV started persecuting Protestants in France. So they brought the story to Germany. But they didn't bring the story I read you. They brought a story that was, these are the Brothers Grimm here. They look kind of grim, don't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They brought the story that had been rewritten by Charles Perrault in France. And Charles Perrault was the equivalent of the Walt Disney of the 17th century. He cleaned up these stories because his intended audience was not peasants, it was the French aristocracy. So in the story that comes from France to Germany, there have been a couple of elements added. One of them is the red cloak, and the other is an ending to the story that actually comes out of another folk tale called the Goat and the Seven Kids, in which the goat mother opens the stomach of the wolf, puts stones in, releases her children, and then the wolf goes to drink in the river and falls in and drowns. So we've got the opening up of the stomach and so forth, plus the added value of the hero here, the happy ending. All's well that ends well. And this is how it comes into our our consciousness anyway. So let me go back to Eric Fromm. We've got a couple of psychiatrists in the 20th century who love this story, love Little Red Riding Hood. And Eric Fromm, I'm just going to read a little bit here. This is what he does. The story concerned an adolescent's confrontation with adult sexuality. Its hidden meaning shows through its symbolism. And the symbolism is the red hood standing for the menstrual cycle, the kind of sexual being of Little Red Riding Hood, who's too young for oral fixation, not young and old enough yet for adult sex, but she's kind of in between. She's a figure who has two paths to follow, and she follows the wrong path there. But there is a happy ending. So here's what another historian said about Erich Fromm. He makes a great deal out of the non-existent red hood as a symbol of menstruation and the non-existent bottle carried by the girl as a symbol of virginity. Hence the mother's non-existent admonition not to stray from the path into the wild terrain. The wolf is the ravishing male, and the two non-existent stones that are placed in the wolf's belly after the non-existent hunter extricates the girl and her grandmother stand for sterility and punishment for breaking the sexual taboo. So, the psychoanalyst takes us into a mental universe that never existed when the first tale was told. And the tale that was told for him originated with psychoanalysis. So we have to understand who's the intended audience for some of these stories that have come to us in an even more modified form through Disney. Okay. Here's our second person who was absolutely enthralled with Little Red Riding Hood, and this is Bruno Bettelheim. And for Bettelheim, the struggle has to do with the triumph of, let me read this. Folktales permit children to confront their conscious desires and fears and to emerge unscathed, id subdued, and ego triumphant. The id is the villain of the Little Red Riding Hood in Bettelheim's version. It's the pleasure principle, which leads the girl astray. The id is also the wolf, who is also the father, and he goes on, and he does a complete psychoanalysis of poor Little Red Riding Hood. Okay, so what are we left with here? How can we investigate what did this story mean to the people who told it, which is what a historian, well, I could be interested in this in terms of a kind of account of what psychoanalysis uses to explain certain phenomena, but I want to go back and try to see what did it mean to the people who told the story. And there is, to go back to the title of this talk, a story called My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me. And in that story, the mother chops up the little boy, and it's a French story. She chops up her son. She makes kind of a salad out of him, a lyonnaise salad, and her daughter feeds the salad to the father. So here we have a mother killing her child, and we have cannibalism going on. And so what did this mean? So I've got a picture there of my mother, she killed me, my father, he ate me. Not really, it's one of Julia Child's salads there. And on the other side, a picture of cannibalism as envisioned by Europeans who came to this continent and saw Native Americans and said they were cannibals, particularly in the Caribbean. Okay, so to go on here, what does my mother, she killed me, my father, he ate me, translate to in terms of the experience that the people had who were telling the story? And I maintain that many of these folk tales and the fairy tales have to do with hunger. You think about it. Here, Goldilocks has eaten the porridge. She's rude and she's broken into their house and she's eaten the porridge. Hansel and Gretel are eating the house of the witch. The witch in Snow White, and I go back to Disney here, makes a poison apple, which then she gives to Snow White, who takes a bite. And what have we got there? Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean. So with both Mother Goose rhymes and fairy tales, there's this theme of food, the lack of food that runs through that. You think about peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot 9 days old, and so on and so forth. We could go through, yeah,
I was
Stephen.
just thinking of the three matches story. Is that Tolstoy? I can't remember who wrote that.
I don't remember
The
either.
Russian tale, the little girl who lights the three matches, bursts the feast, and so forth.
Yeah, it could be, it could well be a Russian tale. I don't know. But in any event, I'm going to give you some reasons why these stories are about hunger. One of them has to do with the mortality factor. About a third to half of the population of Western Europe in the 16th century did not live to their 5th birthday. So women married late, they around 27, they bore children into to the age of 40, maybe. Half of the children would not survive. And the other thing that happens is that there's a practice called rolling over that is punished by, not as a capital crime, but as deserving of penance. And that is parents sleep with their young children in the same bed, and they roll over and the child smothers. Now, we know this wasn't accidental because far more girls are rolled over than boys if we do the demographics. And what does that say? People didn't like their children? Does it say that to you?
For them.
They couldn't afford them. They couldn't afford them. So a kind of infanticide that took place was rolling over. So the mortality figures are really, really significant and severe. There's also something that happens in the beginning of the 15th century called the Little Ice Age, where there's a protracted period of almost 20 years of very cold weathers and winters and wet weather, and famine is a factor in people's lives. And it's a factor in terms of, you don't have to be able to really see very well, but that's a graph that charts the price of grain, the price of rye in Germany over time, and it coincides with, of course, a chart that would have to do with weather conditions and demographics. And when the weather got bad, and when people died of starvation, and when their crops failed, particularly if they were very, very poor peasants, they had to buy food. Now, who were they going to buy food from? The peasants who had money, or had land. So peasants become beholden to other peasants, and there's a lot of tension in society. There's a kind of a hatred for those who have food, as opposed to the ones who are in danger of falling into destitution. Someone took the imagery, the iconography of paintings during this period, and charted when there were at what points were there low connective clouds, cloudiness, dark paintings, visibility, and blue skies. So it coincides also with periods where people are desperate, absolutely desperate for food, to go back to food. Okay. In addition, we've got something else that contributes to the mortality factor and the starvation factor, and that is there's about 100 years worth of war going on between England and France over who's going to rule France, who's going to rule Flanders. Flanders is producing wool and is an economically growing area. And how is dynastic succession going to be treated? Because the former Duke of Normandy becomes the King of France, and the former daughter of the Duke of Aquitaine in France becomes Queen of England. They marry. So Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. So they have claim to England, and their cousins in France have claim to the English throne and so forth. So there's a fight going on, which isn't very pleasant, by the way. This is where we get Joan of Arc, eventually. Then there's something called the Great Schism that goes on, because how do you get to be Pope? It's not because God appoints you. It's a political struggle that goes on, and at one point, there's not just one Pope, but two, and then eventually three. One lives in France, one lives in Rome, and one was exiled from Rome but won't stop being Pope. Sort of like what's going on in Ivory Coast today with the two presidents, right? So what does that do to the mentality of people, even if they're even aware of who the Pope is? How are they going to be safe in the world? Who do you listen to? Which Pope is the right Pope? So that the authority of the church breaks down as well during this period of time. When we've got, and the popes are all excommunicating each other. They're calling each other anti-pope, pope and anti-pope. So there's a big fight going on. Then we have something horribly devastating in the 14th century, and that is something that those who experienced it called the Great Mortality. We call it the bubonic plague. And here's a quote from Boccaccio about the plague, and what does he say? The victims ate lunch with their friend and dinner with their ancestors in paradise. It's about death, it's about starvation, it's about food. Okay, so my mother, she killed me, my father, he ate me. It kind of, well, that's somewhat of an exaggeration. The scarcity of food runs through the whole historical record in Western Europe in the 14th century. It even invades the lives of the saints, the iconography. This is Saint Roch, who was the patron saint of the plague. And the story goes, he was the last one in a monastery. Everybody else succumbed to the plague. He escaped into the woods, and a dog brought him bread every day. Again, food. So he escapes, he survives, he becomes the patron saint of the plague, and people with the plague or fearful of the plague pray to him, and eventually the plague is so powerful that people turn against him and they blame him for the plague. So he's kind of like Saint Christopher. He gets kicked out of the league of the good saints, and he's persona non grata at the end of the 14th century. And there's a couple of, I'm not going to go into all of the ways you get it, but the plague exists. There's a pneumonic form and a septicemic form. The lymph nodes explode, the hands turn blue or black, which is where Black Death comes from, and the mortality rate is a third to a half of the population of Western Europe succumbs to the plague. Sometimes within a day or two, particularly doctors who come to minister to the poor and the sick, and who die the stories are they die at the bedside before the victim dies. And some versions of the plague take longer to, they take a lot longer to kind of take their toll. Artwork, lots of skeletons. There are so many bodies they can't be buried. Sometimes they're buried and hungry animals go in and dig them up and eat them, and the animals get the plague. It's not just humans who die. It's the entire population of animals and humans who are at risk here. And there are some of the death tolls. That shows about a third of the population being taken away. In some areas, whole villages, the population of a whole village went, or especially if it was a walled community like a monastery, that would be a factor. And then the artwork contains lots and lots of images of the dance of death, where the skeletons are playing musical instruments. This is Hans Holbein woodcuts of the dance of death. They're dancing wildly. They're having a great time. Why are they having a great time?
Eating others.
What's that?
Eating others.
Eating others. This is the zombie effect here.
So many are joining you?
They've got great comrades in arms here. They've gone through it already. They don't have to suffer. And death is the great equalizer. It doesn't, a cat, a king, a noble, a peasant. It's going to take them all out, unless you're the Pope. And the Pope sits between two great big fires in Rome, and the fires protect him from some of what's going on in the air. And he survives, and nobody likes him for it. He's kind of suspect. He doesn't protect anybody, nobody likes him. Okay, so I'm suggesting then that if we really want to understand fairy tales, we go back and we try as best we can to look at the arena in which they were told. Maybe not created, but told and changed. And the hunger factor, the food factor, is really, really important. So, that said, we can also take fairy tales and we can make use of them today. And the message that we might want to have taken from our fairy tales might be different from Disney. We have to think about who's the intended audience if we're going to write a fairy tale. We have to think about what do I want to say about myself, my culture, my view of the world. And so I'm going to ask you to do an exercise in here, which I've called Red Riding Hood Redux. That is, you get to finish the Red Riding Hood story. So here you go. And there's a little prompt. There's a little prompt which I'll read to you, and we'll turn the lights on in a minute. This is so not a test. Do not think this is a test. It's so not a test that if you don't like the prompt, you can change it. But you have an opportunity here to rewrite Little Red Riding Hood, and with the prompt if you want. And I'm going to steer you to a book that just came out this spring called, of all things, My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me. And there are 40 fairy tales that are written by very famous authors who take the Grimm fairy tales and then turn them into something that is useful for the 21st century. And particularly, if you read this book, go to the story about the Little Mermaid. It's called The Mermaid in the Tree. And it's very funny. It's scary and it's very funny. That would be my recommendation. So here we've got, you can work together if you want. This is not a test. You can tell each other your names, you can talk to each other here. More than once there was a soon-to-be old woman who had a loaf of bread, held it in her hand, she did, and it was inconvenient to have a loaf of bread always sitting in her hands as she tried to sweep or sew or sneeze. So she said to her daughter, the one with the cheeks, the appalling color of let blood, with a face like that, you haven't anything better to do, so here, take this bread off my hands. The woman said she knew a sickly wolf who would like nothing better than to receive stale bread from her. But be careful, said the girl's mother, as the woods are full of primordial women with faces like the bottom of a river, and who long to feel the weight of bread in their twisted mitts once more. The minute the woman handed the bread to the girl, her face grew dark as thunder, and she barked, "Git!" So you take it from there and finish the story. And I'll give you about, you don't have to flesh it out with lots of words here, but give a scenario and we'll take about 6 minutes to do that, okay? And then we'll talk about it. Yeah, and work together.
So what are we trying to do? So she has to give the Oh, so what we're trying to do with this?
No, that's one possibility. You can do anything.
Or you're trying to teach something about cultural relevant to this. Like blindly obey without thinking of danger, or like not to do what your mother says. You get herself, but she's not. They didn't say that. So instead of giving to the wolf, that's what the mother said, right? Instead of giving the sheep. What happened on the wolf? Another story is like a test of who's a hero. This is the challenge. How would you handle the women of the way the giant, the shoulders. And the girl, she said, go. So I don't know whether that face really died. Or his mother. Maybe his mother. I'm so interested. Maybe when he gets better, then he's going to eat somebody. Like feed 3 minutes left. Like feed this dangerous situation, so it becomes, what if she does feed him? And then he comes and eats the mother or somebody. So let's try. So maybe you have to finish the story. So first part is that how she handles the women. The second part is the wolf wants to know how the soul wait for that. Or maybe the wolf is like sleep and then the prince comes and so what do you want to do? So we're going to do a Disney thing, or we're going to let's plan the ending.
Okay, you got about 1 more minute here, guys. And if you want collectively to sort of tell me the story, because I know you guys have all been talking here. If you have one story, and you want to share it, that's fine. Okay?
She would do it herself. So it's like feed a fear, and then it will become reality, and then you will be consumed by it. So what is more fearful? Primordial? What is this? Primordial.
That's right, because they were scary, but she managed to handle that. She like that.
How did she? Go get to more bread.
Oh,
Suicide way of thinking. So he gets the food, he gets the dog for a wolf. But then, and then maybe the primordial woman and the mother deal with him, because that's what we're gonna do. Or maybe he says, maybe he tells the woman, go to the house right there, and then she'll feed you, so maybe they come and kill them. One way or another, he's gonna kill the mother. Yeah, let's have everybody killed, that's what we do. Everybody is killed.
Okay, all right. Stop. Who wants to share? Somebody in the back, among the ladies in the back. Tell me what you'd like to have be the ending. Share with us what you'd like to have.
Well, I wrote that she grabbed a cane and stabbed the wolf to death. And she discovered her grandma hiding somewhere, and happy ending.
Okay, happy ending. And who's the hero?
Little Mermaid.
Little Mermaid. Okay, all right. Any other variation on that among y'all?
I was their leader, so.
Okay, all right.
So,
Someone else want to share? Sure, go ahead.
we were very cruel.
You were very cruel.
so I say the first part, you can say the second. So when she was walking through the jungle where the primordial women were, and they all came, they wanted the bread, and she was very clever. So she said, oh, how many of you? There are 5? Oh, there's lot more bread in my house. Oh, that's the way my house is. I only have 1, so why don't you go and get more bread from my home? So all those women went, and we'll tell you the ending later, what they did to the mother, and then the girl goes to the
It
wolf.
probably was not good. So then the other thing is that the sickly wolf gets the bread, and so he becomes healthy. And then he eats somebody. I don't know exactly. But we didn't make it.
So everybody's gone.
So-
everybody's gone.
Yeah, so yours was about hunger.
This is lunchtime. We have lunchtime.
It's getting to that time. Let's not have any communion here, though. Someone else.
I got very stuck on the imagery of the woman with the face like the bottom of the river. And so I'm picturing, to me, they were like the trees from the Wizard of Oz, the trees that with the arms, reaching out from the apples. So that she's going through the woods, she has these dead, sickly trees that are trying to grab at her and take the bread from her. But she just narrowly escapes that the wolf is at the end of the forest, and he's the one that takes her out from these women or trees just to eat her. So still stuck with death at the end.
But there's some 19th century imagery, because I've looked through lots and lots of children's books. And there's a really frightening picture of Red Riding Hood going into this little ravine where the trees are very, very threatening. I'll have to show it to you sometime. How about you?
She was writing.
She was writing, okay.
It's really kind of an ending, but I just explained how the old woman's face turned pale as she saw, she didn't imagine that the girl would, or not the girl, but the old woman didn't imagine that the girl would turn as a wolf, so that's what I wrote. I didn't write an ending, I couldn't think of it, so I don't know, but that's what I wrote.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then we wrote that actually the daughter turned into a wolf.
Okay. That's possible. Why not? Did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say how about it was like the opposite of what she said. The wolf would actually eat her and her grandmother, and ending and like that.
A little bit more realistic.
Let's not read this into our children.
Yeah. I don't think these were not bedtime stories.
No, absolutely.
How about you folks? Do you want to share?
I just wrote the little girl thought she was upset and she doesn't want to see that mother anymore. And she said, go out, okay, you're in trouble with her.
So she goes to live with the wolf? All right. And how about you? Did you go?
I just had your grandmother turn into a wolf.
There's an interesting twist on this. Well, you ought to read the story in my book here. This is from the book. the very first
Oh, I
part.
see.
Yeah. And Dean Edwards.
Well, what I did after she left, after she got thrown out of her house, she went through the forest, which is sort of the way she described it, with the branches and the leaves kind of encircling her. And she encountered the first woman who promised her a gift, a toy, which she would give her one half of a loaf. So she thought it over and decided, okay, here's one half of a loaf. And the woman gave her a little top, and she skipped along her merry way. And then she encountered a second woman who saw the bread and likewise promised her an apple to eat if she would give her the other half of the bread. So she thought about it and decided, okay, she gave her the other half, took the apple and skipped along her merry way. And then she encountered the wolf who sniffed and said, I smell bread, where's my bread? And she said, I gave it away for a toy and for an apple, so the wolf ate her.
It's all about hunger.
Same with the deaf.
I don't know how much, are we almost out of time here, I think? I don't know. I happened to be cleaning up my basement, and I found this that my son had written at the end of first grade. And the word hood, the eyes, the two O's in hood are the two eyes of Little Red Riding Hood. And he says, I got to kind of interpret here because it's first grade spelling. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. They went to the Bahamas to be in the Bahamas League of Baseball, and they played. This was a child who has been slamming balls since he was about 18 months old, and so ended up the pitcher eventually on a team. They played the Wolves, and one of them tried to eat grandmother, and then they played the Pigs, and they played and all the other teams lost, and then they went to the World Series. Series spelled S-E-A-R-S, the World Series. And the wolf who was catcher, the wolf was the catcher when grandmother got out to bat, and she hit him in the head, and she hit a home run. And they won the World Series, and they flew back home at the end. So that was meaningful to him. So I just, we could have so much fun with my mother. She killed me, my father, he ate me. And it still can be light. So I want to thank you all.
I have one comment on these folk tales. I remember when our girls were little, we took them to watch Little Mermaid, and me and my husband, we both thought there was too much of violence for little kids in that movie. Did you notice in the Disney movies?
Because of the witch? And
Yeah.
and
all
those
this killing
little pills and everything. Yeah, there is. But it's kind of, there's going to be a happy ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Violence and Bambi,
Yeah, that's right, Bambi. Yeah, a lot of people cried for Bambi.
Bambi, cold from his mom.
Yeah.
It's awful.
So, you might take fairy tales that you've heard as a kid that might be different from the ones that I heard, and think about who would be an intended audience for a changed fairy tale.
Nice.
So thank you all. Thank you very much. I have